coming here. I'm looking forward to our service together here because whether you get anything out of what I say tonight or not, I'm planning on getting some out of it because I'm preaching to myself. I need to hear what I'm planning on saying. I usually preach to myself. I usually write lessons with myself in mind and figure I'll hit somebody else along the way. So I'm needing to hear what I'm going to say tonight. And then I plan on leaving here and going home and watching the Atlanta Braves win game 1 of the playoff series. And it's going to just be a great day, all right? That's the way I feel about it. I want to share with you an old story that I know many of you have probably heard before about a college co-ed who had 2 problems common to many college students: low grades and no money. So she was forced to communicate both of those problems to her parents, whom she knew would have trouble sympathizing and understanding her dilemma. So she used quite a creative approach to reveal to them her problems. She wrote them this letter: "Dear Mom and Dad, sorry I haven't written you sooner. My arm has been broken. I broke it in my left leg when I jumped from the 2nd floor of my dormitory when we had the fire. We were lucky. A young service station attendant saw the blaze and called the fire department, and they were there in just a few minutes. I was in the hospital for a few days, and Paul, the service station attendant, came in to see me every day. And because it was taking so long to get our dormitory livable again, I moved in with Paul. He has been so nice to me. I must admit that I am now pregnant, and I have a funny rash that the doctors are calling a social disease. But don't worry, Mom, the shots are working and we have an abortion clinic nearby. Paul and I plan to get married just as soon as he can get a divorce from his 3rd wife. I hope things are fine at home. I'm doing fine, and I will write more when I get the chance. Love, your daughter, Susan." On the next page, she continued the letter. "P.S. None of the above is true. But I did get a C in sociology and flunked chemistry, and I also need some more money sent for tuition and living expenses. I just wanted you to receive this news in its proper perspective." Pretty sharp co-ed, I'd say, wouldn't you? Because even bad news can sound like good news coming from the right perspective. And that's what that co-ed had figured out. What is perspective? My friends, perspective is nothing more than the way we view something. Amen. Perspective is our outlook on life. One of the best perspective parables I've ever heard involved 2 men quite seriously ill in the same small, stark hospital room. They were both veterans of the war, and they were now both patients in a VA hospital. And the hospital didn't have many resources, and so it was a very stark room, and both of these 2 men had to lay flat on their back all day, every day. Nothing in the room but 2 beds, 2 bedside lockers, a door opening out on the hall, and a window, one solitary window looking out on the world. One of the men on this side of the room, as a part of his treatment, was allowed to sit up in bed for an hour every afternoon, something that had to do with draining fluid from his lungs. And as he sat up in the bed, he was able to look out the window. The 2 men talked about literally everything in their lives. They talked about, as naturally, they had nothing else to do. They talked about their time in the service. They talked about their families, their friends. They talked about the way they had been raised. They talked about their hobbies. This man, when he would sit up for that 1 hour in the afternoon looking out the window, would describe to the other fellow who's laying flat on his back everything he could see. And man, this guy learned to live for that hour a day to listen to that description of what he saw out the window. You see, the window apparently overlooked a park with a lake where there were ducks and swans, children playing games, young lovers walking hand in hand beneath the trees. And there were flowers, long stretches of green grass and games of softball, people taking it easy in the sunshine, a fine view of the city skyline, and the man lying on his back would listen to all this, taking it in, enjoying every minute. Enjoying stories about how the children might fall in the lake when they were chasing a ball, the young lovers as they were holding hands walking along, a boy playing with his puppy. It got so this fella could almost see what was happening outside. And he lived for those moments when his friend would be able to describe it for him. Then, one fine afternoon, the thought struck him. Why should the man next to the window have all the pleasure of seeing what was going on? Why shouldn't he get the chance? Why was he being left out? He felt ashamed and he tried not to think like that, but the more he thought about it, the more he wanted to change. He wanted to be by the window, and he'd do anything to get by the window. Finally, one night, the man in this bed, in the middle of the night, began to cough. He could tell it was serious. He could tell he was about to choke. He could have buzzed the nurse's button at any time, but he laid there and he thought to himself, if the worst happens, I'll be able to move over by the window. And so he listened for several minutes as the cough continued, until finally there was one big sigh, gasp for breath, and then utter silence. The next morning the nurses came in. They found the man dead in the other bed. They quickly hustled him out of the room, tried to prepare the room back the way it would be as if he'd never been there, as often happens in the presence of death. The man in this side of the room waited until a respectable amount of time had passed. And then when one of the nurses came in, he said, I wonder if you would mind if I moved over to that side of the room. And the nurse said, no, that'll be fine. And so they moved him over, and they left him to be alone, quiet and still. Now he was free to enjoy what the other man had been seeing. The minute they'd gone, he propped himself up on one elbow, painfully and laboriously, and looked out the window, and it faced a blank wall. It had been bricked in. It was all in this man's mind. It was all in his perspective. It was all in his outlook on life. Tonight, undoubtedly, some of you may literally be facing a blank wall. And the only thing you can draw on is the beauty and the depth and the color prompted by God and by an outlook of faith and a perspective of faith, hope, and love to lift you up. The only thing that can change your life is developing a perspective of faith, not like this man, but like that man, so that you're able to see what other people simply do not see. What was the difference between the two men? The only thing that was different was their perspective. The only thing that was different was their outlook. One man saw things the other man either could not or would not see. You know what that is? That's called faith. You remember what the definition of faith is? It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things what? Not seen, right? Not seen. That's a perspective of faith. That was the only difference between the two men. Now, there's a great perspective story in the Bible that I want to use as our text tonight. I ask you to turn to 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 8. 2 Kings 6, verse 8. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such a place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king, so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. I guess so, don't you? This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, will you not tell me which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? He thought he had a traitor in his bunch. None of us, my lord the king, said one of his officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. Go find out where he is, the king ordered, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back. He is in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. Now, before we continue the text, let's set this up. Let's look at what was transpiring here. The king of Aram is at war with Israel. The only trouble is that Israel seems to know Aram's every move even before they make it. So every ambush is being thwarted, and the king of Aram is furious. He thinks he has a traitor in his ranks, but he's told, no, they're not traitors, king. We're all loyal to you. The problem lies in Israel. They have a prophet named Elisha. And everything the king says, even in the privacy of his bedroom, Elisha knows. And he informs Israel about it. So the king of Aram said, well, I know what to do about that. We'll make plans to kill this Elisha in Dothan, where he's camping out with a servant. Now, the next scene that we're going to read in the text would make a great movie. In the morning, when Elisha's servant went out to do the chores, to his horror, he saw the army of Aram completely surrounding their campsite. Verse 15. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. What? Come again? I mean, the servant knows that he's camped out alone with Elisha. And he goes out in the morning to do his chores, and he looks up and sees them completely surrounded by the armies of Aram, and he goes and tells Elisha, and Elisha says, don't worry about it. There are more of us than there are more of them. I mean, the servant must have thought to himself, I'm out here with thousands of people against two, and one of them is nuts. And went out early the next morning. An army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. What? Come again? I mean, the servant knows that he's camped out alone with Elisha. And he goes out in the morning to do his chores, and he looks up and sees them completely surrounded by the armies of Aram, and he goes and tells Elisha, and Elisha says, don't worry about it. There are more of us than there are more of them. I mean, the servant must have thought to himself, I'm out here with thousands of people against two, and one of them is nuts. He's having hallucinations. He thinks there are more of us than there are them. Look at verses 17 and 18. And Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so he may see. You see, Elisha was seeing